Hercule Poirot's Murder on the Orient Express. Secrets You Missed. Chapter 1. The Whistle in the Dark. The Orient Express stood motionless under the inky canopy of a Balkan night, its gleaming carriages a beacon of opulence amidst the desolate, snow-draped station. The platform at Vinkovci was nearly deserted, save for a lone porter shivering in his threadbare coat and the faint glow of a lantern swaying in the wind. Inside the train, the air was thick with the scent of polished wood, expensive perfume, and something less tangible, an undercurrent of unease. Hercule Poirot, seated in his first-class compartment, adjusted his perfectly waxed moustache and peered out the frost-edged window. His grey eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the platform with a quiet intensity. He had boarded the train in Istanbul, intending to return to London after a particularly taxing case in Syria. But rest eluded him. Something about this journey felt off. Perhaps it was the hurried whispers of the conductor, Monsieur Bouc, or the peculiar mix of passengers who seemed to orbit one another with guarded glances. The silence of the night was shattered by a long, mournful whistle from the locomotive. It pierced the stillness like a cry, sending a shiver down Poirot's spine, not from cold, but from instinct. He had heard such whistles before, heralding more than the departure of a train. They often signalled the beginning of a puzzle, one that only his little grey cells could unravel. In the dining car, the passengers had gathered for a late supper, their voices a low hum beneath the clink of crystal and silver. Poirot observed them from his corner table, a notebook discreetly tucked beside his plate. There was the American widow, Mrs. Clara Henshaw, her emerald necklace catching the chandelier's light as she laughed too loudly at her own anecdotes. Across from her sat Count Victor Rostov, a Russian exile with a face carved from granite, his eyes darting to the door with every new arrival. Then there was Miss Evelyn Grey, a young English governess whose delicate hands trembled as she sipped her tea, her gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond the window. Poirot's attention was drawn to a man who had not joined the others, a shadowy figure glimpsed earlier, slipping into a second-class compartment with a leather satchel clutched tightly to his chest. The man's face was obscured by a fedora, but his movements were furtive, deliberate. Poirot made a mental note to inquire about him with Monsieur Bouc. Every passenger he knew was a piece of the puzzle, and this one felt like a corner piece, essential, yet elusive. As the train lurched forward, its wheels grinding against the icy tracks, a sudden jolt sent a glass tumbling from a table. The crash was followed by a stifled gasp from Miss Grey, who quickly apologized, her cheeks flushing. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The governess was nervous. But why? Was it the jolt of the train or something or someone else? The whistle sounded again, fainter now, as the Orient Express plunged into the snowy wilderness. Poirot closed his notebook and leaned back, his mind already weaving threads of suspicion. He knew the signs, the glances that lingered too long, the stories that didn't quite align, the secrets hidden behind polished smiles. Somewhere on this train, a darkness was stirring, and Hercule Poirot was determined to bring it into the light. But for now, the night was young, and the train hurtled onward, carrying its passengers and their secrets into the unknown. Chapter 2. Strangers at Midnight. The Orient Express thundered through the night, its rhythmic clatter a deceptive lullaby for the sleepless. In the narrow corridor of the first-class carriage, Hercule Poirot stood motionless, his ear pressed lightly against the polished wood of his compartment door. The hour was late, past midnight, and yet the train seemed alive with whispers, footsteps, and the occasional creak of a door. Poirot's instincts, honed by years of unravelling human deceit, told him that the true nature of this journey was beginning to reveal itself. He had retired to his compartment after dinner, but sleep was a luxury he could not afford. Not when the air buzzed with secrets. Slipping into his silk dressing-gown, Poirot had ventured into the corridor, his small flashlight casting a discreet beam. The train's opulent interior, velvet curtains, brass fittings, and rosewood panelling, felt like a stage, each passenger an actor playing a part. But who was the director of this drama? A soft thud from the adjacent compartment drew his attention. It was occupied by Dr. Heinrich Stahl, a German physician with a clipped moustache and a penchant for staring too long at his fellow passengers. Poirot had noted him at dinner, his conversation laced with cryptic references to debts unpaid and justice delayed. Was the thud a dropped book, or something more sinister? Poirot made a mental note to observe the doctor closely. Further down the corridor, a door opened and a figure emerged. It was the shadowy man from earlier, the one with the fedora and leather satchel. In the dim light, Poirot caught a glimpse of his face, pale, with a jagged scar tracing his left cheek. The man glanced over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing as they met Poirot's. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, the air thick with unspoken questions. Then the man tipped his hat and vanished into the second-class carriage, his footsteps swallowed by the train's rumble. Poirot's curiosity was piqued, but before he could follow, a woman's voice broke the silence. "Monsieur, you startled me." It was Mrs. Clara Henshaw, the American widow, standing at the end of the corridor in a fur-trimmed robe. Her emerald necklace gleamed, but her eyes were wide, her breath uneven. "I couldn't sleep," she said, clutching a cigarette. "Case, this train, it's too quiet, yet too loud. Do you ever feel watched?" Poirot tilted his head, his expression genial but probing. "Madame, on a train such as this, one is never truly alone. But tell me, what keeps you awake at this hour?" Mrs. Henshaw laughed nervously, deflecting with a wave of her hand. "Oh, just old ghosts, Monsieur Poirot, nothing more." But as she turned away, Poirot noticed her fingers trembling, the cigarette case nearly slipping from her grasp. Returning to his compartment, Poirot consulted the passenger list provided by Monsieur Bouc. The scarred man was listed as Mr. Ivan Kessler, a merchant travelling to Paris. A merchant, perhaps, but Poirot suspected the satchel held more than trade goods. And Mrs. Henshaw's old ghosts. They were likely more recent and more dangerous than she let on. As he sat at his small writing desk, Poirot sketched a diagram of the carriage, marking each passenger's compartment. Dr. Stahl, Mrs. Henshaw, Miss Grey, Count Rostov, Mr. Kessler, each a thread in a tapestry of motives. The train jolted slightly, and Poirot's pencil paused. Outside, the snow fell thicker, blanketing the world in silence. But within the Orient Express, the night was anything but silent. Somewhere, a clock chimed 1 o'clock. The hour of strangers was far from over, and Poirot knew that the next move in this game of shadows was imminent. He closed his notebook, his grey cells already at work, piecing together the fragments of a mystery that was only just beginning to unfold. Chapter 3. The Locked Compartment. The Orient Express groaned as it carved its path through the snowy Balkan wilderness, the pre-dawn hours cloaking the train in an eerie stillness. Hercule Poirot, roused from a light doze by a sharp rap at his compartment door, adjusted his dressing gown and opened it to find Monsieur Bouc, the conductor, his face ashen beneath his neatly trimmed beard. "Monsieur Poirot," Bouc whispered urgently, "we have a problem. A grave one. You must come." At once, Poirot's grey eyes sharpened. He followed Bouc through the dimly lit corridor, noting the unnatural quiet. No clatter of breakfast trays, no murmur of early risers. The first-class carriage felt like a tomb, its opulence mocked by the tension in the air. Bouc stopped before compartment 7, the one occupied by Mr. Ivan Kessler, the scarred man with the leather satchel. The door was shut, the brass handle gleaming under the corridor's soft lights. "He does not answer," Bouc said, his voice trembling. "And the door, it is locked from the inside." Poirot's moustache twitched as he assessed the situation. A locked compartment on a moving train was no mere inconvenience. It was a puzzle, and puzzles often concealed darker truths. He knocked firmly, calling out, "Monsieur Kessler, are you there?" Silence answered, broken only by the distant hum of the locomotive. Poirot turned to Bouc. "We must enter. Fetch the master key." As Bouc hurried away, Poirot examined the door. No scratches, no signs of forced entry. The lock was intact, the window beside it tightly sealed against the snow. Yet something felt amiss. A faint metallic scent lingered, barely perceptible. Poirot's mind raced, cataloguing the possibilities: accident, illness, or something far worse. Bouc returned with the key, accompanied by Dr. Heinrich Stahl, who had been summoned from his nearby compartment. The doctor's expression was grim, his medical bag already in hand. "If he is unwell, I am prepared," Stahl said, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Poirot nodded, but his focus remained on the door. Bouc inserted the key, turned it with a click, and pushed. The door resisted, as if something heavy leaned against it. With a collective effort, they forced it open. The sight within stopped them cold. Even Kessler lay slumped on the floor, his fedora askew, his leather satchel clutched to his chest. A dark stain spread across his shirt, the source a single precise wound beneath his ribs. His eyes, wide and lifeless, stared at the ceiling. The compartment was in disarray. Papers scattered, a glass shattered, and a small silver cigarette case glinting on the berth. Poirot's gaze swept the scene, noting every detail: the locked window, the undisturbed snow outside, the absence of a weapon. "Mon Dieu!" Bouc gasped, crossing himself. Dr. Stahl knelt beside the body, checking for a pulse, though the outcome was clear. "He is dead," Stahl confirmed, his voice steady but strained. "Stabbed, I would say, no more than 2 hours ago." Poirot's mind seized on the timeline. Sometime after his encounter with Kessler in the corridor, after Mrs. Henshaw's Nervous appearance at midnight. "Do not touch anything," Poirot instructed, his tone calm but commanding. He crouched beside the body, examining the cigarette case. It was engraved with the initials C.H. Clara Henshaw, or another clue entirely. The satchel, still gripped tightly, revealed nothing without forcing it open, which Poirot refrained from doing. Evidence must be preserved. He stood, turning to Book. "Monsieur, seal this compartment. No one enters without my permission, and summon the passengers to the dining car, all of them." Book nodded, his face a mask of dread. As he and Stahl departed, Poirot lingered, his eyes tracing the room's confines. A locked door, a dead man, a train stranded in snow. This was no ordinary crime. It was a challenge, a labyrinth designed to test even his formidable intellect. Outside, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale glow on the snow. But within the Orient Express, darkness reigned. Poirot adjusted his tie, his little grey cells humming with purpose. The game was afoot, and the locked compartment was only the beginning. Chapter 4. Whispers of the Past. The dining car of the Orient Express, usually a haven of clinking crystal and murmured pleasantries, had transformed into a courtroom of sorts. The passengers, summoned by Monsieur Bouc, sat in uneasy silence, their faces a gallery of guarded expressions. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the room, his small stature commanding the space with an air of quiet authority. The news of Ivan Kessler's murder had spread like wildfire, and the weight of suspicion hung heavy over the velvet-draped tables. Poirot's sharp grey eyes scanned the assembly. Mrs. Clara Henshaw fidgeted with her emerald necklace, her usual bravado replaced by a pallor that no rouge could conceal. Count Victor Rostov sat rigidly, his hands clasped as if restraining some inner turmoil. Miss Evelyn Grey, the governess, clutched a handkerchief, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. Dr. Heinrich, Stahl leaned back, his clinical detachment at odds with the nervous tick in his jaw, and at the far end, a new face, Madame Isabelle Dubois, a French opera singer who had kept to her compartment until now, watched the proceedings with a feline intensity. "Monsieur Bouc has informed you of the tragedy," Poirot began, his voice clear and measured. "Mr. Ivan Kessler is dead, murdered in a locked compartment. This is no accident, mes amis. It is a crime, and the perpetrator is among us." A gasp rippled through the room, though Poirot noted that some reactions seemed rehearsed. Mrs. Henshaw's hand to her mouth, Count Rostov's fleeting glance at Madame Dubois. He held up the silver cigarette case found in Kessler's compartment, its CH initials catching the chandelier's light. "This was found near the body. I ask, to whom does it belong?" Mrs. Henshaw's eyes widened, but before she could speak, Madame Dubois interjected, her voice smooth as silk. "It could belong to anyone, monsieur. Initials are hardly proof." Poirot smiled faintly, noting her quick defence. "Indeed, madam. But secrets, like whispers, have a way of revealing themselves." To maintain order, Poirot began questioning the passengers, starting with their whereabouts between midnight and 3 a.m. Mrs. Henshaw claimed she had returned to her compartment after her corridor encounter with Poirot, unable to sleep but alone. Count Rostov said he was reading in his berth, though he admitted to stepping out briefly to smoke. Miss Grey, trembling, insisted she had been asleep, though her hesitation suggested otherwise. Dr. Stahl confirmed he was in his compartment until summoned by book. Madame Dubois, with a theatrical sigh, said she was practising her scales in private, undisturbed. Poirot's questions were gentle but probing, designed to stir the waters of memory and guilt. He noticed inconsistencies. Count Rostov's cigarette brand matched none found in Kessler's compartment, yet Miss Gray's mention of a loud thud around 2 a.m. aligned with Dr. Stahl's earlier disturbance. Most intriguing was Madame Pieuchieu Vigem Dubois, who seemed to know more about Kessler than she let on. When Poirot mentioned the leather satchel, her fingers tightened around her fan, a fleeting betrayal of composure. As the interviews concluded, Poirot dismissed the passengers, but not before requesting their passports and personal effects for inspection. Alone with Bouc, he examined the cigarette case more closely. Inside, he found a tiny scrap of paper, overlooked in the initial chaos. It bore a single word, scrawled in haste: Vienna. Poirot's moustache twitched. Vienna, a city of secrets, where Kessler's past might intersect with another's present. Later, in the privacy of his compartment, Poirot sketched a timeline of the night's events, circling the names of those whose alibis felt thin. Mrs. Henshaw's cigarette case was a glaring clue, but too obvious. Perhaps a plant. Madame Dubois' knowledge of Kessler hinted at a shared history, possibly romantic or vengeful, and Miss Gray's nervous demeanour suggested she had witnessed something she dared not reveal. Outside, the snow continued to fall, trapping the train in a frozen limbo. Poirot closed his notebook, his mind alight with possibilities. The whispers of the past were growing louder, and each passenger's story was a thread in a tapestry of deception. Kessler's murder was no isolated act. It was a reckoning, rooted in secrets that stretched far beyond the rails of the Orient Express. Chapter 5. The Crimson Stain. The Orient Express lay entombed in snow, its once proud momentum reduced to a standstill as a blizzard raged outside. Inside, the air was stifling, not from heat, but from the mounting dread that gripped the passengers. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the train's immobility, paced the narrow corridor outside Ivan Kessler's locked compartment, his mind a whirl of deductions. The murder was a puzzle, and each clue, however small, was a piece that must fit. Perfectly, Monsieur Bouc had stationed a porter to guard compartment 7, but Poirot requested a second inspection, this time with Dr. Heinrich Stahl's assistance. The doctor, though visibly uneasy, agreed, his medical bag clutched like a shield. As they entered, the scene was as Poirot had left it. Kessler's body now covered with a sheet, the scattered papers, the shattered glass, and the silver cigarette case with its damning CH initials. But Poirot's attention was drawn to the berth, where a faint irregularity caught his eye, a discoloration on the velvet upholstery, hidden beneath a folded blanket. He knelt, his gloved fingers tracing the spot. It was a stain, small but unmistakable, the deep crimson of dried blood. "Doctor," Poirot said sharply, "examine this." Stahl leaned in, his brow furrowing. "Blood, certainly," he confirmed, "but not fresh. It has been here longer than the wound on Kessler would suggest." Poirot's moustache twitched, a second bloodstain, separate from the murder, or evidence of an earlier struggle. Poirot instructed Bouc to preserve the stain for further analysis, though the train's limited resources made this challenging. He then turned his attention to the scattered papers, which he had previously avoided disturbing. With meticulous care, he sifted through them. Receipts, a train ticket stub, and a cryptic note in Kessler's handwriting. Meet V at 1 a.m. platform. The word Vienna from the cigarette case's scrap of paper echoed in Poirot's mind. Was V a person, a place, or both? And had Kessler's midnight rendezvous led to his death? Leaving the compartment, Poirot sought out Mrs. Clara Henshaw, whose initials on the cigarette case remained a glaring thread. He found her in the lounge car, sipping brandy with a forced nonchalance. "Madame," Poirot began, producing the case, "this belongs to you, non?" Her eyes flickered, but she recovered quickly. "Why, yes, Monsieur Poirot. I must have dropped it somewhere. Silly me." Her laugh was brittle, and Poirot pressed further. "In a locked compartment with a dead man. Explain, s'il vous plaît." Mrs. Henshaw's composure cracked. She admitted to knowing Kessler briefly in Vienna, where they had met at a gala 2 years prior. "He was charming, but intense," she said, her fingers twisting her necklace. "He spoke of enemies, debts. I never saw him again until this train." Poirot noted her vagueness, truth mixed with omission. Had she visited Kessler's compartment, or was the cigarette case planted to implicate her? Later, Poirot interviewed Miss Evelyn Gray, whose nervous demeanour had intensified. In her cramped second-class compartment, she sat rigid, her hands folded tightly. "Miss Gray," Poirot said gently, "you heard a thud at 2 a.m., oui? What else did you see?" Her lips trembled, and after a long pause, she whispered, "A shadow, in the corridor. It moved quickly towards the first-class carriage. I was too afraid to look closer." Poirot's eyes gleamed. A shadow at the time of the murder, perhaps the killer fleeing the scene. As the day wore on, the passengers grew restless, their alibis fraying under Poirot's relentless scrutiny. Count Rostov's claim of smoking in the corridor was contradicted by a porter who saw no one there. Madame Dubois, the opera singer, deflected questions about her Vienna connections with practised charm, but Poirot sensed she was hiding a link to Kessler. Even Dr. Stahl's calm facade wavered when asked about the crimson stain. His knowledge of blood seemed too precise, almost personal. Poirot retired to his compartment, sketching a map of the train with the crimson stain at its centre. The stain was a whisper from the past, a clue that suggested Kessler's murder was not an isolated act, but part of a larger tapestry. Was it a remnant of an earlier crime, or a sign that the killer had struck before? The snow outside thickened, sealing the Orient Express in its frozen prison. But within, the heat of secrets was rising, and Poirot knew the next clue would bring him closer to the heart of the labyrinth. Chapter 6. Shadows on the Snow. The Orient Express remained stranded, its steel frame groaning under the weight of accumulating snow. The blizzard had ceased, leaving a ghostly stillness that pressed against the windows. Hercule Poirot, wrapped in a heavy overcoat, stood on the narrow platform beside the train, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The morning light, pale and unforgiving, cast long shadows across the untouched snow, revealing something that made Poirot's heart quicken. a set of footprints leading from the train's first-class carriage into the wilderness. The discovery had come unexpectedly. A porter, clearing snow from the exterior steps, had noticed the tracks and alerted Monsieur Bouc, who in turn summoned Poirot. Now, as Poirot crouched beside the footprints, his grey eyes traced their path. They were deep, deliberate and singular, no return trail. Someone had left the train in the dead of night, braving the storm, and vanished into the snow. "Monsieur Bouc," Poirot said, his voice low, "when did the blizzard stop?" Bouc consulted his log. "Around 3 a.m., monsieur. The snow was heavy until then." Poirot's mind seized on the timeline. Kessler's murder had occurred between midnight and 3 a.m., and Miss Grey had seen a shadow in the corridor around 2. These footprints, preserved by the storm's end, could belong to the killer, or a witness fleeing the scene. But why venture into the wilderness? And how had they exited a locked train undetected? With Bouc's permission, Poirot organised a very discreet search of the train's exterior, focusing on the first-class carriage's access points. Near compartment 7, Kessler's compartment, they found a window with a loose latch, its frame slightly ajar. A thin smear of blood, nearly invisible, against the frost, marked the sill. Poirot's moustache twitched. The crimson stain from the berth, the blood on the sill, and now these footprints. Each clue pointed to a calculated act, not a crime of passion. Inside, the passengers were growing fractious, their confinement fueling paranoia. Poirot gathered them in the dining car to address the new evidence, careful not to reveal the footprints' full significance. "Mes amis," he began, "a detail has emerged that suggests someone left the train last night. I ask, did anyone hear or see anything unusual outside?" The room fell silent, but Poirot noted telling reactions. Count Rostov's jaw tightened, Madame Dubois's fan paused mid-flutter, and Miss Grey's handkerchief twisted into a knot. Dr. Heinrich Stahl spoke first, his tone measured. "I heard nothing, Monsieur Poirot. My compartment is far from the exterior doors." Yet his fingers drummed on the table, betraying unease. Mrs. Clara Henshaw, still shaken by the cigarette case accusation, insisted she had slept through the night, though her bloodshot eyes suggested otherwise. Madame Dubois offered a cryptic smile. "The snow is a great silencer, is it not? Perhaps it hides more than we know." Poirot's questions stirred the pot, but no one admitted to seeing the footprints' maker. He shifted focus to the loose window, asking Bouc to confirm the train's security protocols. Bouc admitted that the staff, overwhelmed by the storm, had not checked every window, a lapse that Poirot filed away as significant. The killer had exploited the chaos, but to what end? After the meeting, Poirot cornered Count Rostov in the lounge car. Sensing the Russian's reticence, held answers. "Count," Poirot said, "you mentioned Vienna in passing at dinner. Did you know Monsieur Kessler there?" Rostov's eyes darkened, but he replied coolly, "Vienna is a large city, Monsieur Poirot. I may have crossed paths with many, but I do not recall him." Yet his hand strayed to a pocket, where Poirot glimpsed the edge of a photograph before Rostov concealed it. Alone in his compartment, Poirot added the footprints and blood-smeared window to his growing diagram. The note about V and Vienna, the crimson stain, and now this external trail suggested a conspiracy rooted in the past. Had Kessler been lured to his death, or was he a target of vengeance? The footprints led nowhere, swallowed by the snow, but they whispered of a shadow that had slipped through Poirot's grasp. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the snow in hues of blood and gold. The Orient Express, a gilded cage, held its secrets tightly, but Poirot's little grey cells were relentless. The shadows on the snow were a challenge, and he would follow them, no matter how far they led. Chapter 7. The Unseen Passenger. The Orient Express, still immobilized by the relentless snow, seemed to shrink with each passing hour, its opulent corridors closing in like the walls of a trap. Hercule Poirot sat in his compartment, his notebook open to a meticulously drawn map of the train, now annotated with clues: the crimson stain, the blood-smeared window, the footprints in the snow. Yet a nagging sense of incompleteness gnawed at him. The puzzle was missing a piece, a vital one. Thoughts were interrupted by a hesitant knock. It was Pierre, a young porter, his face pale and eyes darting nervously. "Monsieur Poirot," he whispered, "I found something. In the luggage car. You must see it." Intrigued, Poirot followed Pierre through the train, past the anxious glances of passengers huddled in the lounge car. The luggage car, at the rear of the train, was a dimly lit cavern of trunks and crates, its air heavy with the scent of leather and dust. Pierre led Poirot to a corner where a tarp had been pulled aside, revealing a small concealed compartment built into the car's wall. Inside was a makeshift bed, rumpled blankets, a half-eaten loaf of bread, and a tattered coat. Most alarming was a crumpled photograph, its edges worn, but the image clear. Ivan Kessler, younger, standing beside a woman whose face had been scratched out. Poirot's heart quickened. "Who found this?" he asked. Pierre admitted he had stumbled upon it while reorganizing luggage during the storm. "I told no one but you, monsieur. It frightened me." Poirot examined the compartment closely. A faint trace of tobacco ash dusted the floor, and a single hairpin gleamed in the folds of the blanket. The implications were staggering. An unseen passenger, hiding aboard the Orient Express, undetected by Bouc's staff. Had this stowaway witnessed or committed Kessler's murder? The scratched-out face in the photograph suggested a personal vendetta, one that might connect to the elusive V from Kessler's note. Returning to the first-class carriage, Poirot confronted Monsieur Bouc with the discovery. Bouc was aghast, insisting that every passenger had been accounted for. "A stowaway? Impossible! Our checks are thorough." But Poirot's raised eyebrows silenced him. The loose window, the overlooked security lapses during the blizzard. There had been opportunities for someone to slip aboard. Or, Poirot mused, for a passenger to play a double role. In the dining car, Poirot observed the passengers with renewed scrutiny. Mrs. Clara Henshaw, whose cigarette case remained a point of contention, was now avoiding eye contact, her fingers nervously twisting her emerald necklace. Count Rostov, usually stoic, seemed distracted, his gaze lingering on the photograph Poirot had discreetly placed on the table during lunch. Madame Isabelle Dubois, the opera singer, maintained her air of detachment, but Poirot noticed her pause. When he mentioned Vienna, her fan snapping shut like a guillotine. Miss Evelyn Grey, however, provided an unexpected lead. When Poirot gently pressed her about the shadow she saw in the corridor, she hesitated, then confessed, "I heard singing, soft like a lullaby, coming from the end of the carriage. It stopped when the shadow moved." "Singing?" Poirot's mind flashed to Madame Dubois, but the governess's description didn't match her operatic style. Could the unseen passenger be the source? A woman, perhaps, given the hairpin? Poirot requested a thorough search of the train, focusing on hidden spaces. The porters, under Bouc's reluctant supervision, found nothing more, but the discovery of the compartment had rattled the passengers. Whispers of a ghost or phantom began to circulate, fueling paranoia. Dr. Heinrich Stahl, ever the skeptic, dismissed the idea, but Poirot noted his unease when asked about the tobacco ash. Did it match the brand he smoked? As night fell, Poirot sat alone, piecing together the clues. The unseen passenger was a shadow within a shadow, their presence tying the crimson stain, the footprints, and Kessler's murder into a single thread. The photograph, with its defaced figure, hinted at a betrayal that had festered over years, perhaps in Vienna. Poirot added a new name to his diagram: the unknown. Whoever they were, they had moved unseen, and their silence was louder than any confession. Outside, the snow glowed faintly under a sliver of moon, casting shadows that danced like spectres. The Orient Express was no longer just a train. It was a stage, and the unseen passenger was its most dangerous player. Poirot closed his notebook, resolved to unmask this phantom before the next act of the tragedy unfolded. Chapter 8. A Game of Motives. The Orient Express, locked in its snowy prison, seemed to pulse with secrets, each creak of its gilded framework a reminder of the murder that had shattered its elegance. Hercule Poirot stood in the dining car, his small frame casting a long shadow as he faced the assembled passengers. The discovery of the unseen passenger's hideout had ignited fear, but Poirot knew fear was a catalyst. Truth often slipped through the cracks of panic. Today he would play a game of motives, stirring the pot to see whose secrets boiled over. The passengers sat in uneasy clusters, their eyes flickering between Poirot and one another. Mrs. Clara Henshaw's bravado had crumbled, her emerald necklace now tucked beneath her collar as if to ward off suspicion. Count Victor Rostov's granite facade was cracking, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm. Miss Evelyn Grey clutched her handkerchief, her gaze darting to the windows as if expecting the unseen passenger to appear. Dr. Heinrich Stahl maintained his clinical calm, but his jaw tightened when Poirot mentioned the tobacco ash. Madame Isabelle Dubois, ever the enigma, watched with a faint smile, as if the proceedings were a performance she'd seen before. Poirot began with a calculated gambit. "Mes amis," he said, his voice smooth but piercing, "Monsieur Kessler's death is no random act. It is a reckoning, rooted in motives that bind you to him and to each other. I ask you now, what did Kessler mean to you?" He held up the crumpled photograph from the luggage car, its scratched-out face a silent accusation. The room tensed, and Poirot's grey cells hummed, anticipating the lies and half-truths to come. Mrs. Henshaw spoke first, her voice brittle. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot, I barely knew him. A passing acquaintance in Vienna, nothing more." But her eyes lingered on the photograph, and Poirot pressed, "And yet your cigarette case was found in his compartment. A coincidence, perhaps?" She flinched, muttering about carelessness, but her story felt rehearsed, a script missing key lines. Count Rostov was next, his tone clipped. "Kessler was a name I heard in Vienna, nothing more. A man of debts and enemies, but not mine." Poirot noted the photograph in Rostov's pocket, glimpsed earlier. Did it match the one from the luggage car? When asked directly, Rostov deflected, claiming it was a family keepsake. Poirot let the lie stand for now. Miss Grey's response was a whisper. "I never met him before this train, I swear it." But her trembling hands betrayed her, and Poirot recalled her mention of the lullaby and the shadow. Was she protecting someone, or herself? Dr. Stahl claimed ignorance of Kessler, but his knowledge of the Crimson Stain's age suggested a familiarity with blood that went beyond medicine. Madame Dubois, with theatrical flair, admitted to hearing of Kessler in Viennese circles, a man who burned bridges, but denied any personal connection. Her fan, however, snapped shut when Poirot mentioned the hairpin from the stowaway's hideout. The interrogations revealed a pattern. Vienna, always Vienna, a city threading through their stories like a needle. Poirot shifted tactics, focusing on the unseen passenger. "Someone hid aboard this train," he said, watching their faces. "A woman, perhaps, given the hairpin. Who is she, and why did she flee?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, but Poirot caught a glance between Madame Dubois and Count Rostov. A fleeting conspiracy or mere coincidence? As the passengers dispersed, Poirot lingered, joined by Monsieur Bouc, who was fraying under the strain. "Monsieur Poirot, this talk of a stowaway, it terrifies the staff. What if the killer is still among us?" Poirot nodded gravely. "They are, monsieur, and their motive is the key." He requested access to the passengers' passports again, cross-referencing their travel histories. A pattern emerged. Henshaw, Rostov, and Dubois had all been in Vienna in 1923, the year Kessler's photograph was dated. The breakthrough came late that evening. While examining Kessler's satchel, which Bouc had finally opened under Poirot's supervision, Poirot found a hidden pocket containing a letter, its wax seal broken. Addressed to V, it read, "The debt is due. Meet me or the truth will out." The handwriting matched Kessler's, and the letter's tone suggested blackmail. Was V one of the passengers, Victor Rostov perhaps, or the unseen passenger whose scratched-out face haunted the photograph? Poirot closed his notebook, the game of motives yielding its first clear move. Kessler had been a predator, leveraging secrets for power, and someone had silenced him. The snow outside gleamed under the stars, but within the Orient Express, the shadows grew darker. Poirot knew the next revelation would tip the balance, exposing the heart of this deadly game. Chapter 9. The Clock That Stopped. The Orient Express, trapped in its icy cocoon, seemed to hold its breath as the third day of confinement dawned. The air inside was thick with suspicion, the passengers' civility fraying like worn velvet. Hercule Poirot, ever the calm centre of the storm, sat in Ivan Kessler's sealed compartment, his gloved hands carefully sifting through the evidence. The crimson stain, the blood-smeared window, the footprints in the snow, and the unseen passenger's hideout formed a complex mosaic. But a new clue was about to shift the entire pattern. Poirot's attention was drawn to a small pocket watch, half buried beneath the scattered papers on Kessler's berth. It was an elegant piece, silver with intricate engravings, but its face was cracked and its hands were frozen at 1:47 a.m. A time that clashed with Dr. Heinrich Stahl's estimate of Kessler's death between midnight and 3 a.m. Poirot's. Grey cells sparked. Had the watch stopped naturally, or had it been tampered with to mislead the investigation? He examined it closely, noting a faint scratch near the winding stem, suggesting it had been forcibly opened. He summoned Monsieur Buch and Dr. Stahl to the compartment. "Doctor," Poirot said, holding up the watch, "if Kessler died closer to 3 a.m., why does his watch mark 1:47? Stahl's composure faltered, his eyes narrowing. "Perhaps it was broken earlier," he suggested, but his tone lacked conviction. Poirot pressed further. "Or perhaps someone stopped it deliberately to confuse the timeline. What say you?" Stahl offered no reply, his fingers tightening around his medical bag. Poirot's suspicions deepened. The clock's stopped hands were a lie, a calculated move to obscure the murder's true hour. He recalled Miss Evelyn Gray's account of a shadow and a lullaby around 2 a.m., and the footprints in the snow, preserved after the blizzard ended at 3. The watch suggested the murder occurred earlier than assumed, meaning the killer had lingered on the train, perhaps staging the scene before fleeing. In the dining car, Poirot confronted the passengers with the new evidence, watching their reactions like a hawk. "A clock stopped at 1:47 a.m., he announced, "yet the body tells a different story. Someone has tampered with time itself. Who among you knows why?" Mrs. Clara Henshaw gasped, her hand straying to her throat, where her emerald necklace was now conspicuously absent. Count Victor Rostov's face remained impassive, but his eyes flicked toward Madame Isabelle Dubois, who fanned herself with studied calm. Miss Gray's handkerchief was now a crumpled ball, her lips trembling as if on the verge of confession. Poirot zeroed in on Mrs. Henshaw, whose connection to the cigarette case still nagged at him. "Madame, you knew Kessler in Vienna. Was time a factor in your dealings with him?" Her face paled and she stammered. I don't know what you mean. He was just a man I met." But Poirot noticed her glance at Count Rostov, a silent plea or warning. He made a mental note to investigate their relationship further. Madame Dubois, sensing the scrutiny, offered a diversion. "Monsieur Poirot, this watch could belong to anyone. Why assume it's Kessler's?" Her voice was honeyed, but Poirot caught the edge beneath it. He produced the letter from Kessler's satchel, addressed to V, and read aloud, "The debt is due. Meet me or the truth will out." "Madam," he said, "does V mean anything to you?" Her fan paused, and for a moment her mask slipped, revealing a flash of fear. Later, Poirot interviewed Miss Gray privately, sensing her fear might yield truth. In her second-class compartment, she broke down, sobbing. "I lied, Monsieur Poirot. I saw more than a shadow. There was a woman in the corridor near Kessler's door. She wore a dark cloak and she dropped something. I think it was a hairpin." Poirot's pulse quickened. The hairpin from the stowaway's hideout. Could Miss Grey's woman be the unseen passenger? As night fell, Poirot updated his diagram, circling the stopped clock as a pivot point. The tampered watch, the lullaby, the hairpin, and the letter to V wove a narrative of betrayal and revenge centered in Vienna. Kessler had been a blackmailer, and someone, perhaps the unseen passenger, had stopped his clock for good. But who was V? Rostov, Dubois, or another player yet to be revealed? Outside, the snow glowed faintly, reflecting the train's golden lights. The Orient Express was a microcosm of deceit, and Poirot knew the next move would expose the killer's hand. He closed his notebook, his little grey cells poised for the unravelling of this deadly charade. Chapter 10. Veils of Deception. The Orient Express, a gilded labyrinth trapped in snow, seemed to hum with the weight of its secrets. Hercule Poirot stood in the lounge car, his notebook open to a page dense with notes, arrows and circled names. The stopped clock, the crimson stain, the footprints and the unseen passenger's hideout formed a constellation of clues. But it was the letter to V and Miss Evelyn Grey's tearful confession that now guided his little grey cells. The veils of deception were thinning, and Poirot was determined to tear them apart. The morning was tense, the passengers' nerves frayed by confinement, and Poirot's relentless probing. He had requested their presence in the dining car. But first he sought a private audience with Madame Isabelle Dubois, whose evasive charm had grown suspect. In her lavish compartment, surrounded by silk scarves and perfume bottles, she greeted him with a raised eyebrow. "Monsieur Poirot, to what do I owe this honour?" Poirot wasted no time. "Madame, you know more of even Kessler than you admit. The letter to V, the Vienna connection, your name, Isabelle, does it not begin with V in some languages?" Her fan snapped shut, her smile vanishing. "You overreach, monsieur," she said coldly. "I am no V. Kessler was a shadow from Vienna, nothing more." But Poirot noticed a photograph on her dresser, partially obscured by a shawl. Two women, one resembling the scratched-out figure from the luggage car. He filed it away, letting her think she'd deflected him. Next, Poirot confronted Count Victor Rostov, whose guarded demeanour and Vienna ties made him a prime candidate for V. In the lounge car, Rostov was polishing a pocket-knife, his movements deliberate. "Count," Poirot said, producing the letter, "Kessler demanded a meeting with V. Was it you?" Rostov's eyes flashed, but he laughed. A hollow sound. "Kessler was a parasite. If I were V, I'd have dealt with him years ago." Yet his hand strayed to the photograph in his pocket, the same one Poirot had glimpsed earlier. Oh, connection, perhaps, to Madame Dubois? The dining-car meeting was a powder keg. Poirot stood at the head, his voice steady but commanding. "Mes amis, the veils of deception are lifting. Kessler was a blackmailer, his letter to V proof of his schemes. Each of you hides a truth tied to Vienna, 1923. Speak now, or I shall uncover it myself." The room erupted in protests, Mrs. Clara Henshaw's voice shrill, Dr. Heinrich Stahl's measured but strained. Miss Grey sobbed quietly, while Madame Dubois and Count Rostov exchanged a glance that Poirot did not miss. Mrs. Henshaw, cornered by the cigarette case, broke first. "All right, Monsieur Poirot. I knew Kessler better than I said. In Vienna, he—" He swindled me, threatened to expose a scandal. I paid him to stay silent." Her admission hung in the air, but Poirot sensed it was incomplete. Had her anger turned to murder, or was she a pawn in a larger game? Dr. Stahl, pressed about the crimson stain, admitted to treating a patient in Vienna with a similar wound, hinting at a past encounter with Kessler's world of crime. "I am a doctor, not a killer," he insisted, but his knowledge of the stain's age suggested more than professional curiosity. Miss Grey, emboldened by the other's confessions, added, "The woman I saw. Her cloak had a brooch, shaped like a crescent moon." Poirot's mind raced. The hairpin, the lullaby, and now a brooch. The unseen passenger was no ghost, but a woman with a purpose. The breakthrough came when Poirot re-examined the photograph from the luggage car. Under a magnifying glass, he discerned a faint outline beneath the scratches. A woman with a crescent moon brooch. The same woman appeared in Madame Dubois' photograph, standing beside a younger Kessler. Poirot's pulse quickened. Madame Dubois was linked to the unseen passenger, perhaps as an accomplice or rival. Was she V, or was the stowaway the true target of Kessler's blackmail? As night fell, Poirot updated his diagram, drawing a line between Dubois, Rostov, and the unseen passenger. The stopped clock had been a distraction, but the veils of deception were parting. Vienna, 1923, held the key. A scandal, a betrayal, or a crime that had followed Kessler to his death. The Orient Express, its lights flickering in the snow, was a stage nearing its climax, and Poirot knew the next act would reveal the killer's face, or force them to strike again. Chapter 11. The Final Confession. The Orient Express, a gilded prison encased in snow, seemed to hold its breath as the fourth day of confinement unfolded. The dining car was a theatre of nerves, its crystal chandeliers casting fractured light over the passengers, who sat in a semicircle, their faces taut with dread. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre, his small frame radiating authority, his grey eyes glinting with the certainty of a man who had solved the puzzle. The crimson stain, the stopped clock, the footprints and the unseen passenger's hideout had converged, and now Poirot was ready to draw the final confession. He began with a quiet intensity. "Mes amis, Yvon Kessler's murder is a tapestry of vengeance woven in Vienna, 1923. Each of you is a thread, bound by secrets you thought buried. Tonight, the truth will out." He held up the photograph from the luggage car, its scratched-out face now a symbol of betrayal. "This woman with her crescent moon brooch is the key. She was on this train, unseen, and one of you knows her name." Mrs. Clara Henshaw, her emerald necklace abandoned, shrank in her seat, her earlier bravado gone. Count Victor Rostov's hands were clenched, his photograph, the one matching Madame Isabelle Dubois, still hidden in his pocket. Miss Evelyn Grey's eyes were wide, her handkerchief shredded. Dr. Heinrich Stahl's clinical mask was slipping, his fingers twitching. Madame Dubois, her fan motionless, met Poirot's gaze with a defiance that bordered on desperation. Poirot turned to Madame Dubois first. "Madame, your photograph shows you with Kessler and a woman, the same woman whose face was scratched out. You claimed no deep connection, yet Vienna binds you. Who is she?" Dubois' lips parted, but before she could speak, Miss Grey stood, her voice trembling but resolute. "It's her! The woman I saw in the corridor. She was Madame Dubois, Sister Vivienne." The room gasped, and Dubois' fan fell to the floor. Poirot's moustache twitched. A breakthrough at last. "Vivienne," he repeated. "The V in Kessler's letter." "Explain, Mademoiselle Grey." Sobbing, Grey recounted how she had overheard Dubois whispering to someone in her compartment the night of the murder, addressing them as Vivienne. The lullaby, the hairpin, the crescent moon brooch, it all pointed to Vivienne, the unseen passenger who had hidden in the luggage car. Dubois, cornered Rose, her voice a mix of fury and sorrow. "Yes, Vivienne is my sister," she confessed. "She was ruined by Kessler in Vienna. He seduced her, swindled her fortune, and threatened to expose her shame. She followed him onto this train, hiding, to confront him. But I swear, she did not kill him." Her eyes darted to Rostov, a silent plea. Poirot pivoted to Rostov. "I count. Your photograph matches Madame Dubois. You knew Vivienne too. Were you her protector or her accomplice?" Rostov's face darkened, and he produced the photograph, revealing Vivienne beside a younger Kessler. "I loved her," he admitted, his voice raw. "Kessler destroyed her. I wanted him dead, but I did not strike the blow." The confessions cascaded. Mrs. Henshaw admitted to paying Kessler to keep silent about her own Viennese scandal, fearing exposure would ruin her. Dr. Stahl revealed he had treated Vivienne in Vienna for injuries inflicted by Kessler's associates, explaining his knowledge of the crimson stain. Each passenger had a motive, a reason to hate Kessler, but the killer's hand remained elusive. Poirot's voice cut through the chaos. "The stopped clock was a ruse, set to 1:47 to mislead us. Vivienne, the unseen passenger, met Kessler at 1 a.m., as his letter demanded. But someone else entered compartment 7 later, between 2 and 3, and struck the fatal blow." He paused, his eyes locking onto Miss Grey. "Mademoiselle, you saw the shadow, heard the lullaby. You know more than you've said." Grey collapsed, weeping. "It was me," she whispered. "I killed him." Vivienne confronted Kessler, but he attacked her. "I was in the corridor, saw it through the door. I took the knife from his desk and stabbed him to save her. I dropped Mrs. Henshaw's cigarette case to confuse things." The room froze, the weight of her confession shattering the last veil of deception. Poirot nodded, his expression sombre. "You acted to protect Mademoiselle, but murder is murder. The footprints, the blood-smeared window. Vivienne fled to hide your crime, oui?" Grey nodded, tears streaming. Dubois and Rostov, stunned, reached for each other, their shared love. For Vivienne now, a bond of grief. The Orient Express, its snowbound silence unbroken, bore witness to the truth. Poirot closed his notebook, the puzzle complete but heavy with moral ambiguity. One confession had been won, but the final act, justice, loomed. The train's lights flickered, casting long shadows, as Poirot prepared to face the consequences of the truth. Chapter 12. Secrets Beyond the Rails. The Orient Express, still locked in its snowy embrace, seemed to exhale as the truth of Ivan Kessler's murder settled over its gilded corridors. The dining car, once a stage for deception, now hosted a sombre reckoning. Hercule Poirot stood before the passengers, his notebook closed, his grey eyes reflecting the weight of justice and compassion. Miss Evelyn Grey's confession had unravelled the mystery, but the threads of Vienna, 1923, and the unseen passenger, Vivienne, demanded a final resolution. The passengers sat in stunned silence. Mrs. Clara Henshaw, her bravado stripped away, clutched a handkerchief, her role as a blackmail victim now a footnote. Count Victor Rostov and Madame Isabelle Dubois held hands, their shared love for Vivienne binding them in grief. Dr. Heinrich Stahl, his clinical facade softened, stared at the floor, his past in Vienna a shadow he could not escape. Miss Grey, pale and trembling, awaited her fate, her act of desperate protection now laid bare. Poirot spoke, his voice steady but tinged with sorrow. Mes amis, the murder of Ivan Kessler was a crime born of pain, not malice. Mademoiselle Grey acted to save Vivienne, whom Kessler had wronged in Vienna. The crimson stain, the stopped clock, the footprints in the snow, all were pieces of a puzzle designed to obscure the truth. But truth, like the Orient Express, cannot be stopped forever. He turned to Grey. Mademoiselle, you have confessed, and your honesty honours you, but the law is clear, and justice must be served. Grey nodded, tears streaming, but Poirot raised a hand. Yet I am Hercule Poirot, and I see not only the crime, but the heart behind it. Kessler was a predator, his blackmail a poison that infected you all. I propose a choice. The passengers leaned forward breathless. Poirot explained that the train, still stranded, would soon be freed by rescue crews. When authorities arrived, he could present Grey as the sole killer, her motive clear, and let the law decide her fate. Or, he suggested, they could share the burden of guilt, claiming a collective act of vengeance against a man who had tormented them all. Each of you had reason to hate Kessler, Poirot said. Together you could shield Mademoiselle Grey, but it requires your silence and your conscience. A murmur rippled through the room. Mrs. Henshaw, her voice hoarse, spoke first. I'll stand with her. Kessler took everything from me but my dignity. Let it end here. Rostov and Dubois, united by Vivienne's suffering, agreed, their eyes fierce with resolve. Stahl, after a long pause, nodded, citing his oath to heal, not harm. The passengers, once strangers bound by secrets, now forged a pact born of shared pain. Poirot turned to Monsieur Bouc, who had listened in anguished silence. Monsieur, you are the guardian of this train. What say you? Bouc, torn between duty and empathy, sighed. Monsieur Poirot, I trust your judgment. Let the truth remain on this train. Poirot nodded, his decision made. When the authorities arrived, he would present a simplified account. Kessler's murder was a crime of passion, the killer unknown, the clues lost in the snow. As the passengers dispersed to Poirot thought, Poirot, satisfied, let the matter rest. Some secrets he knew were best left beyond the rails. The snow began to thaw, and the distant rumble of a rescue engine signalled the end of the ordeal. Poirot stood alone in the corridor, gazing out at the melting landscape. The Orient Express had been a crucible, forging truth from deception, justice from mercy. His notebook, now a record of a case unlike any other, would remain private, its pages a testament to the human heart's complexity. As the train stirred to life, its whistle piercing the dawn, Poirot adjusted his moustache. The journey was over, but the secrets of the Orient Express would linger, carried by its passengers into a world forever changed. For Hercule Poirot, it was enough to know that his little grey cells had prevailed, illuminating the darkness beyond the rails.